Well, it looks like the Europeans have managed to convince the American president, and after today's statement by Donald Trump, that the Russian dictator is insane. In Europe, a rather breakthrough decision was made for Ukraine. In particular, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the United States of America have officially stopped restricting the range of weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine. This will allow attacking military targets at a greater distance. And as Friedrich Merz publicly stated today, now the armed forces of Ukraine can use any Western missiles to strike Russian territory and destroy any military targets there on Russian soil. Moreover, today both Friedrich Merz and Emmanuel Macron publicly stated that finally Donald Trump has begun to understand that Putin is deceiving him, and all of Putin's statements about wanting to achieve peace are all lies, and in fact he was simply leading the American president by the nose. Moreover, Friedrich Merz is making a statement today that is simply impossible not to notice. In it, there is a hint that Germany will soon transfer Taurus missiles with a range of 500 kilometers to Ukraine. And here is an interesting coincidence. Already this week, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is heading to the German capital, Berlin, to meet there with Chancellor Merz and President Steinmeier. What do you think? Why? But really, the Americans have made certain concessions here, but not completely. The thing is, as the Washington Post is now reporting, in Washington they are still afraid of angering Putin. And the United States is still not ready to announce the transfer of Patriot systems to Ukraine, not ready to hand them over, but they are ready to sell them through the Europeans. The Europeans say, no problem, we'll pay for them, you just make sure to deliver them to Ukraine. So friends, this is really a breakthrough decision, though with some nuances. I suggest we discuss it in this episode. My name is Pechy. Today is May 26th. Let's go over everything step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave a comment. All of this is important so that the algorithms show this episode to as many viewers as possible. Also subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. There I publish news as soon as it comes in, quite promptly, which is very important, and all of it is verified. So now let's go over everything step by step. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the United States today lifted restrictions on a number of military supplies to Ukraine. This was announced by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who stated the following: Ukraine can now defend itself, in particular, for example, by striking military positions on the territory of Russia. Until a certain point, it could not do this. This information is also confirmed today, stating that Berlin no longer restricts the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine. The publication also reports that now the armed forces of Ukraine are very likely to receive German Taurus missiles. Merz also emphasized the necessity of supplying Ukraine with long-range weapons, and it is expected that Germany may provide from 100 to 150 Taurus missiles, which are an analog of the British-French missiles. In particular, after the statement, a tweet appeared on the social network X from Friedrich Merz. And there, he already quite strongly hinted at what will happen next. In particular, Friedrich Merz writes the following on the social network X: "We will do everything in our power to continue supporting Ukraine. This also means that we no longer have any restrictions on the range of the weapons we supply. Ukraine will now be able to defend itself by striking military positions in Russia." Well, friends, this is already a very clear hint about Taurus missiles, and as they say, it just couldn't be more obvious. Merz is suggesting that the missiles will be delivered soon. Moreover, after this, the same Merz stated that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin perceives negotiations with Ukraine as a sign of weakness. And if the countries do not continue the dialogue, they need to prepare for the war to last longer. Next, I will quote another statement from the Chancellor of Germany. "It is obvious that Putin sees negotiations as a weakness, even if the proposal for a meeting in the Vatican does not receive approval from Russia. We must be prepared for this war to last longer than we want or can imagine." And after all these statements by Friedrich Merz, the publication writes that Zelensky is planning to visit the German capital, Berlin. In particular, the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, will visit Berlin this Wednesday, where he will meet with the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, and not only with him, but also with the President of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. According to Spiegel, they will discuss possible steps for further technical negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, and also plans regarding the new package of European Union sanctions against Russia, which aims to increase pressure on Moscow. As the publication writes, it is likely that behind the scenes, the leaders of both countries will also discuss further military support for Ukraine. Publicly, the new German government does not want to openly talk about arms deliveries as it did before. But behind the scenes, there are discussions about how Germany could help the Ukrainian defense industry in the production of long-range weapons. Again, I think you won't find a more obvious hint here. Well, as previously reported, the same Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, has already stated that Germany and its allies are ready to move to confiscate frozen Russian assets if it is legally permissible. However, he added, it is also necessary to be aware of the risks that such a step could bring to the European financial market. And Germany as a whole, under Friedrich Merz, refused to publicly discuss the possibility of sending Taurus air-launched cruise missiles to Ukraine. And a representative of the German Ministry of Defense said that the German government does not want to draw excessive attention to this issue. And he promised that the country would continue to support Ukraine with weapons, including long-range ones, but would not specify exactly which weapon systems would be supplied or when. In addition, the head of the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Iogan Wadeful, stated that Germany would offer Ukraine additional weapons packages if negotiations with Russia to resolve the war fail. And now, Merz is openly saying that since they are clearly failing, Putin is obviously deceiving everyone. It's time to deliver long-range missiles and completely lift all restrictions on them. So, the missiles are being supplied to Ukraine. And where Ukraine will strike with these missiles is purely a matter for the armed forces of Ukraine. The geographical restrictions previously imposed by former United States President Joe Biden no longer exist. As you remember, when the Army Tactical Missile System missiles were supplied, it was allowed to strike Russian territory, but only a certain part of it, only a specific zone. This led to the Russians simply moving their strategic bombers, aviation, and some multiple launch rocket system and artillery systems a little further back. In fact, it was impossible to seriously damage the Russians at that time. The Europeans and Americans are now telling Ukraine to strike military targets anywhere, but not civilian infrastructure, as they lift restrictions. In principle, you can strike. Taurus missiles may also appear. Well, here I want to share with you today's thoughts of the military observer from Bild, Julian Rebke. As a rule, I don't agree with him, but here I actually do agree. He states the following: after massive Russian attacks on major Ukrainian cities, the United States president wrote the following about Vladimir Putin. Something happened to him. He has completely lost his mind. Missiles and drones are being launched for no reason at all. Putin's actions adhere to a distinct pattern, says Julian Rebke. After each call from Trump, he attacked Ukraine even more ruthlessly, and the threats against Kiev became increasingly fierce. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in particular, stated that there would be no cessation of military actions in Ukraine along the line of contact. That is, Russia will seize by force all the regions annexed in 2022. Putin cold-bloodedly uses concessions made to him to put even more pressure on Ukraine. After the third conversation between Trump and Putin, the Russian army attacks Kyiv and other cities, threatens to annex 7 Ukrainian regions, and to create a buffer zone inside Ukraine. Putin's reaction to Trump's carrot without a stick shows that Trump completely misjudges Putin, or still hasn't realized that Putin sees concessions as weakness, summarizes Julian Rebke. Well, after this statement, the French President Emmanuel Macron says that Trump apparently finally understands that Putin lied to him about being ready for peace. Macron, who is currently on a diplomatic trip to Vietnam, was asked to comment on the latest Russian shelling of Ukraine. And so Macron expressed the opinion that the United States president is realizing some aspects of Vladimir Putin's lies regarding Ukraine. And further, he added that he hopes Trump's anger at Putin will translate into appropriate actions. Well, probably the president of France meant the sanctions that the United States, together with the European Union, could impose against the Russian Federation. Well, here we also need to give credit to the Europeans. Because despite the current position of the American president regarding Putin, in Washington they are still afraid to provide Ukraine with weapons as part of new military aid packages. But the Europeans came up with a very interesting trick. And as the United States Secretary of Defense, Pechy, writes, at the beginning of June he will go to NATO headquarters where, among other things, the issue of air defense systems will be discussed. At that time, a statement may be made about the transfer of new Patriot systems to Ukraine, but not from the United States of America. Right now, the Trump administration is avoiding making loud announcements about arms deliveries to Kiev, fearing it could disrupt possible negotiations. As Seixas writes, they believe that a large-scale statement about the transfer of missiles for Ukraine, this is not what they want, because it would greatly anger the Kremlin dictator Putin. They are very concerned that this could jeopardize any potential peace negotiations. Ukraine, as the publication writes, is concerned about obtaining additional American Patriot air defense systems, since the supplies provided during the administration of former President Joe Biden are running out, and the new administration is showing reluctance to send new ones. While Russia is shelling Ukraine with drones and cruise missiles, it is the ballistic missiles that cause the greatest fear, and only Patriot missiles are capable of effectively countering them. These missiles travel at speeds of several kilometers per second, and it was precisely these that destroyed half of Ukraine's energy capacities as a result of strikes on the energy system in the 23rd and 24th years. Ballistic missiles are one of Russia's most effective weapons, especially against infrastructure due to their speed, size, and the difficulty of interception. And now Ukrainian officials believe that the Trump administration will be ready to sell Patriots to Ukraine rather than provide them as aid, as the previous administration did. After Ukraine signed an agreement on United States mineral resources, the Trump administration allowed Germany to re-export Patriot materials to Kiev, although the United States retains the right to veto the resale of any of its military equipment. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, in turn, announced that Patriot missiles and 4 IRIS-T systems would soon be delivered to Ukraine. It is reported that Berlin intends to send older PAC-2 missiles, which are not as effective against ballistic missiles as the more modern Patriot Advanced Capability 3. The only other existing system that could potentially intercept ballistic missiles is the European Aster missile, but its effectiveness has not yet been proven. At the same time, considering the speed and size of ballistic missile warheads, having a sufficient number of Patriot systems is a matter of saving human lives. Some officials in the American administration understand this, but the others do not. For other countries, transferring Patriot systems to Ukraine is a difficult step, since it is an expensive and important part of their national security. But I would like to remind you that recently the Europeans have already made it clear and publicly stated that they are ready to allocate money to purchase American weapons for Ukraine. That is, in Europe they said, okay, we perfectly understand that Trump most likely will not approve any new military aid packages for Ukraine. European reserves are not bottomless after all, and they can't give everything away. Therefore, they are ready to buy weapons from the Americans for Europe, and then Europe will further transfer them to Ukraine. The Europeans said that money is not a problem. We're really ready to buy these weapons. The main thing is that Trump shouldn't be afraid to at least sell it, not even transfer it, but at least sell it for Ukraine. Well, for now, there is hope that Pechy will be in Brussels at the beginning of June, and there this deal will finally be concluded. But the main breakthrough in this situation is that the Europeans still pushed through the idea that the United States should also lift the restrictions on the range of strikes with Western missiles. And soon we'll see what this will lead to, as they say, on the battlefield, and whether we will finally get Taurus missiles from Germany. I believe it will be clear by Wednesday this week. For now, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinion and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like.